Welcoming you back again into our shared space and to Insight Community of the Desert. And the community is a little different every time we get together because we're different. And how we show up is always a product of what we're experiencing in our lives right now. So I want to offer some thoughts and practices that I've been working with over the last week or so. So I just came back from teaching a retreat for the Lotus Insight Sangha in Seattle. And we practiced for 5 days on Samish Island, north of Loch Connor, for those of you who know that part of the world. And I'd never been to Samish Island, and it was just breathtakingly beautiful in that way that the Northwest sometimes is, and the weather more or less cooperated. A lot of less, a lot of mud, a lot of cold. And when I told people where I lived, they were like, don't talk about it. Uh, but where we were was truly supportive of our practice. And Samish, this Samish island is the ancestral homeland or one of the homelands of the Samish nation. And the Samish word for their tribe, for their people, means the giving people. So Samish means the giving people. And so we were on the island of the giving people, and their presence is still very strong in the area, and the presence of the people who had lived and worked and practiced and been on that land for thousands of years was very strong. And there's a site along the beach where the longest longhouse in the Pacific Northwest had been. So people had been practicing on this land for thousands of years. So to be able to be there was an incredible privilege, and I felt it really deeply. Um, and so part of me is a little bit still in retreat space and reflecting on what I learned there, because you learn a lot when you're teaching and supporting and listening to people. And being part of running a retreat is incredibly challenging and stressful. You get 60 people on the land and then another 25 online, and everyone coming into a new space together at the same time. Lots of needs, lots of people, myself included, engaging in what I call the business of me. Figuring out how I get my creature needs met. Where do I sleep? How do I get from here to there? What do I eat? Do I like what I'm eating? Does the food agree with me? Is it too cold? Is it too wet? Is it too muddy? How do I take care of myself? And usually in those first day or two, there's a few moments of, what have I gotten myself into? I'm never doing this again, never. And yet I keep going back. And it's interesting to reflect why, because there's something in retreat practice that really works for me. And I see it working for other people, and I see it working over time. And so, what do I mean by working? So, just to share some thoughts and reflections today, this is a general sort of talk, not the kind I usually do that's really planned and where I think about the subject for weeks before. So I sat down to gather my thoughts yesterday, and I didn't really know what I wanted to say, just that I wanted to share what's alive for me. And maybe there will be something in what I share that lands for you. So Dharma talks like this are a traditional part of every retreat and most Buddhist meetings, like the one we're having today. But like everything, they are absolutely of the moment, and we relate to them as we are ourselves in that moment. And we are always changing. And so this is the mark of existence that the Buddha called anicca, impermanence, ephemerality, the shifting nature of everything, the newness of the expression of life in this moment. So maybe you've experienced that when you hear a teaching or a truth or a piece of advice, and because of where you are in that particular moment, you get it. And it's like, oh, yeah, oh, now I see this. I've heard people talking about this for years, but now I see it for myself. We are where we are right now. And one of the ways that I felt really inspired was witnessing an intergenerational group, people from 30 to 90 years old, willing to engage with this going within practice in these times when everything seems to be falling apart. And greed and hatred and delusion, that the Buddha called the three poisons, the source of all our suffering, are rampant. And in some ways, there may be a blessing in that, because the obviousness of it, the loudness of it right now, in a way makes it easier to resist, because we can see it so clearly. It isn't subtle anymore. And many of the folks in Lotus Insight are activists and helpers in their lives. And we were all holding that tension, being still, going within, in a world that's so in need of love and care right now. And sometimes that inner voice of shame or doubt will arise. What good does it do just to sit there? You have the privilege of taking this time. What about people who are really suffering right now? What about them? And there's no easy answer to that. But there are some responses. By not practicing, who are you helping? By not practicing, do you become clearer, more compassionate, more able to respond? By not practicing, do you grow? Can we truly grow in lasting wisdom and love without developing these qualities of mindfulness, presence, awareness that we develop on retreat and in rooms like this? And can I rest with this apparent paradox of taking this inward facing time and being of benefit in the world? And a lot of Buddhist lineages take the Bodhisattva vow, which is a paradox in itself. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. So I'm vowing to put off my enlightenment, my freedom, until all beings can join in that freedom. And the beautiful activist chant that we sang here earlier this year, no one is getting left behind this time. No one is getting left behind. We get there together or never get there at all. And as logical and methodical as the Buddha's teachings, the Dharma, as logical as it is, it's also full of paradoxes like these. Sometimes the Buddha called them imponderables, saying that they would lead to vexation if we spent a lot of time on them. And I happened on a discussion that I had with a Dharma friend and the Buddha's words in something called the Ignorance Sutta. And so these are the Buddha's words. A first point of ignorance is not seen such that before this there was no ignorance, and afterwards it came into being. So how did we get into this mess? The Buddha didn't say. What he taught was how ignorance is fueled, how it continues, and how it subsides, and that there is a release. In another sutta, he says, there is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, you could not know an escape to freedom. We'll come back to that a little later. And considering these paradoxes, being still to be of benefit, the Bodhisattva vow, the origin of suffering, points to one of the teachings that I've received that was so alive for me on the retreat. It just kept coming up. And it comes from Gina Sharp, who's the founder of New York Insight Meditation. And very often it's that one line in a talk or even an entire retreat that lands for you. Either you understand it or you feel drawn to it, you want to understand it, or you want to live with it a bit. You just recognize something, feeling the truth of it, but not quite logically, a recognition of the heart. And that happened for me the first time I heard Gina say, our practice is an endeavor outside of time and space. Our practice is an endeavor outside time and space. And when I talked to people on the retreat about their practice in meetings, I found myself wanting to share that again and again. Because even if I can't prove that or totally understand all the dimensions of that, the invitation that it offers is so supportive of our practice because it encourages us to let go of striving, of metrics, of checking off the boxes, which are really subtle ways of distracting us from this, from our experience right here, right now. And it's so natural and encouraged in our culture to want to get somewhere, to want results, and results equal proof. And so we can really turn the practice into something that we don't enjoy when we approach it as something to be checked off on a schedule or think that we are late or using it as something to get somewhere, time and place, rather than this, here, now. And so I often remind people, notice the arc of your practice, not this last sit that you did, or the retreat that you just sat, or that retreat or another, but the whole of it. And I was talking to one person who noticed that their mind was quieter. They were experiencing a quieter mind with less distracting thinking and a certain amount of stillness, and they were appreciating that. And then they chalked it up to being older, a blessing of age. My mind doesn't work so well anymore, so my mind is quieter. And I pointed out that it might have something to do with the decades of practice that you've done, because I knew this person had. What's arising in this moment doesn't arise alone by itself or for no reason. There are causes and conditions. There's a continuum of practice. And it's so important for me to remember that. The Buddha likened our practice to walking out into the water or wading out into the ocean, somewhere where there's a broad continental shelf. And I don't know if you've experienced that, but you walk and you walk and you walk and you walk, and it seems like maybe you get a millimeter deeper every 10 feet. And then you go out about a mile, and then suddenly there's a drop, and the depths open up. And that is what the Buddha says our awakening experience is like. Lots of practice, maybe lifetimes, and then sudden awakening, but not sudden at all, really. So when I teach retreats, I'm really lucky to get one 45-minute meditation in the morning and maybe a short walk in the afternoon. The rest of the time is spent organizing, preparing, giving talks, instructions, and lots of meetings with the managers, the co-teachers, and then lots of practice meetings with groups and individuals. So it's like often I'm up at 5:30 or earlier and feel like I'm working until 10:30 at night. It's a lot. And yet, I look at my fitness tracker and my resting heart rate is 7 beats lower than it was when I came into the retreat. And with everything happening, I think I'm really stressed. And yet, there's part of me that isn't feeling that. And I was telling my co-teacher and mentor, Irina Weissman, about this and about the person who thought that their mind was quiet because of age. And she pointed, well, it's the same thing you told her. It's your sustained practice, the continuity of practice, conditioning this moment. It's not the 45 minutes that you sat this morning. It's the hours and weeks and months you've sat over time. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes some sense. And I mentioned still being a little in retreat mode now. And what I meant by that was being in the practice and also sort of feeling the effects of retreat. And we can actually access these in our own lives at home if we choose to. And so I was just thinking about some of those aspects that we can choose to live with for a day or a weekend or whatever length of time we might have available for us. We can create our own retreat containers, centering our practice for the time that we decide, bringing mindfulness in our meditation, our movement, our eating, our bathing, our cooking throughout the day. Committing to a time, a day, a half day, a weekend, whatever it might be. And during that time, being mindful of careful of what you ingest, taking a complete break from the news, from social media, from email. You know, what would happen? What would a day be like if you put your phone on silent or turned it off and tucked it away, or even for 12 hours? Eating really simply and practicing with others if you can during that day or that weekend. And it's not hard to find online sitting groups that you can join any day of the week. So there are 3 just in this community. And Mary offers a daily morning sit, and there are ones all over the country. And then because it's always here, letting nature teach us. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So that retreat feeling that I mentioned is just an echo of practice. 30 or 40 minutes of practice in the morning will affect your entire day. A day of practice will affect your week, and a week of practice may change your life. And the Buddha actually says this, and he describes the satipatthanas, which are the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And we practice with them all: mindfulness of body, mindfulness of sensation, mindfulness of thoughts, mindfulness of Dharma. And the Buddha says if anyone should develop these 4 establishments of mindfulness in this way for 7 years, and then he goes down 6, 5, 4, 3, or 7 months, or even 7 days, one of 2 fruits may be expected: final knowledge here and now, or if there's a trace of clinging left, non-returning. So liberation. And I realize, it feels like I just gave us a metric there. Yet the point is also here that the practice is powerful and effective, and we don't know when it leads to release, when it leads to liberation. And also in our practicing, we can't make stillness happen. We can't make wisdom happen. We can support the conditions for them to arise. Like we can prepare soil for seed and tend and water and love the garden. So the paradox of taking care of what is inside here to take care of the world that we're in, holding our practice outside of time. And then I want to touch on self-compassion again, which I brought into the last talk I gave when we were together. And it came up so many times on this retreat. And one of the things that I want to bring back from that talk that I gave here is that teaching of how mindfulness lets us see or know the 2 minds that Ruth Denison and many teachers talk about: the conditioned mind and the mind that is intuitive and aware. We have 2 minds always running: the conditioned mind, and the mind that is intuitive and aware. Or we could say the mind that belongs to this organism and the mind that belongs to no one. And when we practice, we get to notice that that mind that is aware of is not caught up in. And that's where we have that space to really look at what's here with the healing qualities of mindfulness and curiosity in a field of caring or compassion. And it's taught that when we practice, there are certain requisites for being able to practice the Dharma. And one is a human birth. And you might have heard um, the teaching of the Buddha. Suppose bhikkhus, monks, the earth was covered with water, completely covered with water, and a man were to throw a yoke with a single hole in it into the sea. A blind turtle surfacing once every 100 years would stick its neck through that hole. How likely is that? It would be sheer coincidence, Venerable Sir, they said. Even so, it is a sheer coincidence that one obtains the human state. So, being born human, and then living in a time when the Dharma is present, to live in a place and time where it isn't so unsafe that you can't practice, to have enough health and resources to practice, to have all of these conditions is an incredibly rare and privileged opportunity. And then even if we have everything that we need and we want to practice, there's a very human tendency to think that if I practice the Dharma, it will make everything okay. It will heal me. And it will, but it's not a quick fix. The effects are cumulative. And practicing doesn't make the pain of being human go away. It helps us to hold that pain with greater skill. So if we are practicing to get rid of this reality, it doesn't work. Our practice may lead to new views of reality, new tools for holding what's here. And when we come into practice, we need a baseline of readiness, those requisites. We may have all of those conditions met, and yet we stop to meditate, wanting that healing so much, and the instructions to stay with the breath feel impossible because there is so much inner turmoil and pain that show up the second that we close our eyes. And the Dharma heals over time, but it's a tool that heals because we see reality clearly. And so self-compassion is absolutely necessary. So sometimes people use meditation as permission to repress, like I can just sit here and push everything away. Or we find I can't sit here, I'm in too much pain. And when that happens, and this is why I wanted to bring in the compassion practice again, we have that opportunity to bring compassion into the field. This is a moment of suffering. I am in pain here. Suffering is a part of life. Understanding that the pain I feel, the dukkha that I feel, is not wrong. It's not unusual. I'm not alone with that. But it requires a certain kind of response. May I be kind to myself? May I intend toward kindness? And may I give myself the compassion that I need? How will I take action to care for myself? And that compassion might look like having our practice be movement or walking or metta or very short periods of still meditation. Or if it's really, really acute, working with a psychotherapist to help us hold that acute pain. Enough compassion so that we can begin our practice. Because wherever we are, it's like this, and that can be very hard to be at peace with. So we need supports, we need conditions to even begin the practice. And most of us come to the Dharma because we're in some pain. And I went to so many retreats wanting a certain experience, a certain relief from pain, an experience that happened on the first retreat I went on. And then measuring everything that happened, every retreat that followed, all my practices, by whether or not that thing happened. And for me, I wanted to taste that unborn, that unconditioned. And I would pretend to myself and my teachers that I wasn't wanting it, that I wasn't pushing away anything unlike that, but I was. And the fact was that for years I was practicing against that benchmark, that metric of the first experience. And it's like the waiter rule. I don't know if you know this. If you're carrying a tray that's laden with dishes and glasses and plates and things, you don't look at the tray as you walk across the room. If you do, everything starts rattling and shaking. Instead, you look ahead in the general direction of where you want to go, faithful that you'll get there, and knowing that each individual step you take is needed and shows up in the right place and right time. So our practice is an endeavor outside of time and place. And whatever is here is what we work with. And it won't always be pleasant. It isn't. Practice does not make life pleasant. We don't get everything we want because we practice. But what we get, the experience that we have, is held with growing wisdom, acceptance. This is here now, and compassion. And so you are just as you should be in this moment. I am just as I should be in this moment. There is nothing wrong with any of us. And even to say that I am as I should be is not right, because each of us is a process, never truly fixed, always in motion, in a sea of motion, anicca. And so this is why practicing in beautiful places like the forest, the desert, even our patios, we witness the moment by moment change of everything, the millions of sounds and sensations and movements of the earth and life all around us. Nature is constantly in motion, constantly teaching us, never fixed, never finished, always responding. And we are part of that nature. We belong here because we are here, made of earth and called into being by earth. Sometimes humans see themselves as not belonging, like we, out of all the trillions of organisms on the earth, do not belong. The fact is that we belong very much. We may need to learn better manners and how to share, but we are not separate from everything else on this earth. And so one of the most powerful practices I know on retreat, and we can really do it anywhere, is to sit in meditation for a while, focusing on the breath or another object that tends toward gathering, tends toward stillness, as much as it does for us. And after some time, 45 minutes, 30 minutes, 20 minutes, rising mindfully, simply standing, sitting, or if it's available to you, walking outside with no destination, no need, and no words. What is this moment actually like on the level of experience? The inner question of what is this expressed wordlessly through the openness of the senses to being open to what is here. as a non-commenting, non-analyzing being, seeing and being seen by all that is. So I wanted to close with a passage from Robin Wall Kimmerer and her book Braiding Sweetgrass. And Robin Wall Kimmerer is a professor of botany and writing and Native American and brilliant poet. And so she wrote this. I sat once in a graduate writing workshop on relationships to the land. The students all demonstrated a deep respect and affection for nature. They said that nature was the place where they experienced the greatest sense of belonging and well-being. They professed without reservation that they loved the earth. And then I asked them, do you think that the earth loves you back? No one was willing to answer that. It was as if I had brought a two-headed porcupine into the classroom. Unexpected, prickly. They backed away slowly. Here was a room full of writers passionately wallowing in unrequited love of nature. So I made it hypothetical and asked, what do you suppose would happen if people believed this crazy notion that the earth loved them back? The floodgates opened. They all wanted to talk at once. We were suddenly off the deep end, heading for world peace and perfect harmony. One student summed it up, you wouldn't harm what gives you love. Knowing that you love the earth changes you, she writes. Knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. We never practice alone. We never practice without being seen and witnessed. So let's just take a couple of minutes to allow the words to land. And maybe let them go. See what's present for you. Thank you for your practice and your kind attention. And I'm just remembering to turn off the background so that folks on Zoom can see folks on land. And would love to hear any thoughts or reflections, anything that came up for you during either your practice or the talk, and folks online or folks on land. So deep blessings on your practice and your week and all that you hold dear.